and he wouldn't even let me compete for a job. And I said, well, this is crazy. I know I can play. I know I'm better than he is. And I said, just let me compete.
At 69, Joe Montana still can't forgive the team that pushed him out. 4 Super Bowl rings, a body destroyed by the game, a stranger who tried to kidnap his grandchild, and a legacy slowly being forgotten. The tragedy of Joe Montana is beyond heartbreaking. Let's get into it. The cool that couldn't last. It was September 26, 2020, around 5 o'clock in the evening, and Joe and Jennifer Montana were home at their beachfront residence in a wealthy stretch of Malibu, California. Their 9-month-old grandchild was asleep in a playpen in the living room. And then, in the kind of nightmare that does not announce itself, a 39-year-old woman who was a complete stranger to the family walked in off the street through an unlocked door, made her way to the sleeping infant, lifted the baby out of the playpen, and carried the child upstairs. The crews who cover the wild side of celebrity life could hardly believe what they were reporting.
I think I kind of say this a lot, but this is really
the craziest,
the wildest story I have ever worked on, Renee.
A stranger had a Hall of Famer's grandchild in her arms on the 2nd floor of his own home, and the man whose entire identity was built on staying calm under fire was now living the one situation no playbook ever prepared him for. Joe and Jennifer rushed upstairs and confronted her.
Thankfully, Jennifer and Joe heard a commotion and rushed to the room where they confronted this woman.
Think about the impossible math of that moment. This is a stranger holding your grandchild. You cannot simply tackle her because the baby is in her arms, and any violence risks the very life you are trying to protect. So the Montanas did the only thing they could do. They tried to talk her down, calmly, repeatedly asking her to hand the baby back, and she refused. Words failed, and so it came down to hands.
The lady would not get rid of the baby, so Jennifer Montana is then forced to physically confront this woman.
In the end, it was Jennifer who pried the infant free, and the intruder bolted from the house. Joe gave chase down the street, and by what can only be described as divine luck, there happened to be a Los Angeles County Sheriff's deputy nearby working an entirely unrelated case, whom Joe flagged down, and the woman was located in a nearby home and arrested shortly afterward. The suspect, later identified as Sadsai Dalzell, was charged with attempted kidnapping of a child in first-degree residential burglary, and the baby was mercifully completely unharmed. When the dust settled, the famously private quarterback offered the world only a few measured words, writing that it was a scary situation, but that everybody was doing well and asking respectfully for privacy. It is a story with a happy ending, and it would be easy to file it away as a freak occurrence, a 1 in a million crime that landed on the wrong doorstep. But it works as the perfect doorway into the real tragedy of Joe Montana, because it forces you to confront an uncomfortable truth. The cool, calm, collected hero we worshipped is, at the end of the day, a 60-something-year-old man and his wife, terrified for a baby, no different from any frightened grandparent in any frightened house. The myth is just a man, and the man, it turns out, has been quietly falling apart for a very long time, because the deeper tragedy was never going to arrive through the front door. It was already living inside his own body. Long before the events in Malibu, Montana sat down and let the public in on a secret that genuinely stunned the people who had watched him play. The man who had treated his body as a finely tuned instrument his entire life, who had outrun and outthought the most dangerous athletes on the planet, was told by a doctor that the enemy was now coming from the inside.
I hadn't gone to the doctor in a while after I retired. And Jen was saying, I think you should just start getting yearly physicals.
That single routine, almost boring decision, go get a checkup, changed how he saw himself.
And the first one I went to, I ended up being diagnosed with, 2 risk factors for heart disease.
High blood pressure and high cholesterol, the silent precursors to heart disease, in a man who had been an elite professional athlete his entire adult life. He was so certain it had to be a mistake that, by his own admission, he flatly refused to believe the results the first time he heard them. And the more he looked, the more frightening the picture became, because this was not random bad luck. It was written into his blood.
I started remembering my grandfather on my mother's side passed away at 54 from a heart attack.
The history was everywhere once he started looking for it. His grandfather died of a heart attack before the age of 55. 2 of his uncles on his mother's side suffered heart attacks in their early 50s, and Jennifer's own father died of a massive heart attack at 60. It is a double-loaded family history, the kind that does not just threaten one man, but reaches forward into his children. And the chilling thing about heart disease, as he came to understand it, is precisely that it gives you no warning at all.
And I never thought I'd have heart disease, so I understood what
what the issue was, but I never thought that I would be affected by it.
So he changed everything. He took the salt shaker off the table even though he loved salt, cut his portions, reduced the red meat and the grease and the fried food he had happily devoured for years, added fruits and vegetables, and rebuilt his life around prevention. But here is the part that turns the heart story into something genuinely tragic. Even his exercise, the thing that had defined him, was no longer his to command freely. When he tried to describe how his physical regimen had to change after football, the word he reached for was not adjusted. It was something far heavier.
Yeah, I call it sentenced. I'm kind of sentenced to low impact and no impact kind of workouts now.
Sentenced, as if his own body had handed down a verdict, and the punishment was a life lived gently, carefully at half speed. And when he compared himself to the other old warriors of his generation, the comparison was bittersweet. He said, doing better than most of them. And yet that small mercy came wrapped in a brutal admission.
I'm doing better than most of them. And I can still get around, and I can't really run much.
I can't really run much. Read that again and let it land. The man who built an entire mythology out of escaping the unescapable, who scrambled and rolled and danced away from the most ferocious pass rushers in history, can no longer run across his own yard. The cumulative damage was cataloged in a candid 2016 interview when he was just 59. Arthritis in his hands so severe they hurt like crazy in the middle of the night. Ruined knees that gave out when he tried to move. Multiple neck fusions, lingering back damage, and a body that had already endured more than 24 surgeries. By recent years, he had collected full knee, shoulder, and hip replacements, and the shoulder operation on his throwing arm went so wrong, it became infected and required even more surgeries. This is the daily cost of being a legend. Not a single dramatic injury, but a slow, relentless accounting that the body keeps in silence and presents to you with interest in your 60s. And yet, as devastating as the physical toll is, Joe Montana himself would tell you it is not the part that hurts the most, because there is a different kind of pain, one that no surgeon can operate on, one that no checkup can catch. It is the pain of being a man the whole world once worshipped, and slowly, gently being forgotten. Both canonized and forgotten. There is a particular cruelty reserved for the people who reach the absolute summit of their field. For 20 years after he walked away from the game, Joe Montana was not merely a great quarterback. He was the quarterback, the consensus, automatic, no argument necessary greatest of all time. Undefeated in 4 Super Bowls with 11 touchdowns and 0 interceptions across them. The architect of the West Coast offense's golden age and of immortal moments like the catch. He was the gold standard against which every other passer was measured. To be the best who ever lived is the dream. But the dream has a hidden clause buried in the fine print, and the clause reads, someone is always coming, and someone came. His name was Tom Brady, and over the course of an impossibly long career, he stacked up 7 championship rings to Montana's 4, played at an elite level into his mid-40s, and quietly, methodically did the one thing that rewrites history. He made the old answer feel outdated. By the early 2020s, Brady had become the near universal default at the top of the list, and Montana found himself reframed as a clear number 2, an era-adjusted legend. The old school answer that younger fans skip right past. To his enormous credit, when the question was put to him directly and publicly, Montana did not flinch or sulk or rage against the dying of his own light. He answered it like the gracious champion he is.
Oh, I think Tom has, taken his place on the top up there a long time ago.
He went further, refusing to undercut his rival even slightly, and offering the kind of generous public acknowledgement that very few displaced kings could manage with a straight face.
So he's had a tremendous career. It's fun to watch.
That is the face the public sees. Placid, generous, at peace. But the most revealing and heartbreaking portrait ever drawn of Joe Montana came in February of 2023 in a sprawling 12,000-word ESPN feature by Wright Thompson titled, With Quiet Devastation, Joe Montana Was Here. And the genius of that piece is that it goes past the calm public face and into the home where the people who love him most see what he will not say out loud. Thompson described him perfectly, a man placid on the surface, churning beneath the waves. His daughters, who have watched him their whole lives, see the churning. One of them, Elizabeth, put it with painful precision, observing that he would never admit to caring, but that he gets noticeably animated whenever the Brady comparison comes up, quick to point out how much the game has changed. And his daughter Allie offered the single observation that gives this entire story its name, the quiet, aching sentence that captures what it feels like to be a monument that the world is slowly walking away from. She said that she can see a kind of heartbreak in her father, a man who knows what it is like to be both canonized and forgotten, and that the more distance he gets from his his career, the more time he spends reminiscing on the old stories. Canonized and forgotten, worshipped as a saint, and at the very same time slipping out of the collective memory. That is the tragedy in its purest distilled form, and it is so much sadder than simple defeat, because Montana did not lose. He won everything there was to win. The world simply moved its attention somewhere newer, and when you start looking, you can see that slow fade play out in small, almost comic moments that the family quietly recognizes as something heavier. Consider the Guinness commercial he filmed, the now famous spot built entirely around generational disconnect. In the ad, Montana sits at a bar, sips the dark beer, and describes it as smooth as velvet, prompting an older man to compare the description to Montana himself in his playing days, to which a younger, oblivious patron turns and innocently asks if he used to play tennis. A four-time Super Bowl champion, one of the most recognizable athletes in American history, calmly mistaken for a retired tennis player by a kid who has no idea who he is. And Montana, ever cool, just smiles and says, "Sure, kid, the joke is funny." But the ESPN profile noted exactly what that joke really is. His most recent Guinness commercial has him at a bar where he laughs when some young guy asks if he used to play pro tennis. It is the fade, packaged and sold as comedy, with Montana himself in on the bit. It happened in real life too, in a way almost too perfect to be true. He once attended a college volleyball game at the University of San Francisco to support a family friend, and the stands swelled to 3,000 people the moment word spread that he had arrived. During a break, a baffled player asked the coach why the crowd had suddenly grown so large. The coach told her, "Joe Montana is here." And the young player, lighting up with recognition, exclaimed, "Oh my God, Hannah Montana's dad is here." The greatest quarterback of his era, recognized not for 4 Super Bowl rings, but as the imaginary father of a Disney pop star. He found it funny. His family saw what was underneath it. So how does the coolest man in football actually feel about all of this when you strip away the gracious public answers and the good-natured commercials? The profile got him as close to honest as he gets. When Thompson asked him point blank whether Brady surpassing him bugs him, Montana said not really, and then trailed off into something far more telling. Murmuring, "You start thinking I wish," and letting the sentence die unfinished. Those unfinished words contain the whole tragedy. And in a lighter setting, when asked to simply choose between himself and Brady, the competitor underneath the calm came roaring out. He said without hesitation that he was taking himself for sure, then added, laughing, that under today's rules protecting quarterbacks, rules he never had, he probably would have won more than 4 championships and avoided a couple of those season-ending injuries. And this is where his argument stops being sour grapes and starts being something closer to a genuine, unanswerable historical injustice, because the era he played in was quite literally a different and far more brutal sport. Montana has repeatedly pointed out that he competed before the modern wave of rule changes designed to protect quarterbacks, the same protections that allowed Brady to play, largely unmolested, for an astonishing 23 seasons into his mid-40s. In Montana's day, a quarterback was fair game, hunted and hammered on every play. He has noted that the violence which effectively ended both his career and Steve Young's was simply erased from the version of the position that Tom Brady went on to dominate for more than 2 decades. It is not an excuse. It is an asterisk that history has quietly declined to write. The idea that the man with 4 rings paid a physical price in blood that the man with 7 rings was, by the grace of an evolving rulebook, largely spared. And yet Montana refuses to let that argument curdle into the open bitterness it could so easily become, because he has watched what that path does to a man. He idolized the great Johnny Unitas growing up, and he watched Unitas grow bitter against the NFL after the game destroyed his body, a fate Montana openly fears and has tried desperately to sidestep. The profile draws the same haunting parallel to Joe DiMaggio's lonely, embittered later years, a comparison Montana understands deeply, even as he flatly rejects being called bitter himself. That tension, feeling the injustice in his bones while refusing to let it consume him, is exactly the churning beneath the placid surface that his family describes. He is fighting every single day not to become the cautionary tale he was warned about. There it is. The thing he is not jealous of, he insists, is the extra rings. What he envies is the experience, the chance to keep competing at that rare altitude, the prolonged life at the top that Brady got and that violence stole from him. And that single distinction is the doorway into the deepest wound of all, because Joe Montana did not retire on his own terms. He did not get to ride into the sunset as the beloved king of San Francisco. He was, in his own telling, pushed out the door long before he was ready to go. And to understand the real source of the heartbreak his daughter sees, we have to go back to the city that made him and the betrayal he has never ever been able to forgive. The wound and the way home. Every great tragedy needs an origin wound, the first cut, the one everything else flows from. For Joe Montana, that wound has a date and a place, and more than 3 decades later, he still cannot talk about it without the old fire flaring up behind his eyes. It began on January 20, 1991, in the NFC Championship game, when Montana, at the peak of his powers, was blindsided by Giants defensive end Leonard Marshall and driven into the turf, leaving him with a broken hand, cracked ribs, a bruised sternum, and a concussion. That hit, followed by a torn elbow tendon, cost him nearly 2 full seasons, and in that absence, a younger, faster man named Steve Young stepped in, played brilliantly, won the MVP award, and the organization made its decision. When the wounded king finally healed and asked for nothing more than the chance to win his job back on the field, the answer he received broke something inside him that has never been repaired. He has told the story many times, and the details never soften. The injustice of it as he sees it is total.
We had just won 2 Super Bowls in a row. When I left the game, we were still winning.
He was not a declining player being eased aside. By his account, he was leaving at the absolute height of his game, mid-dynasty, on the way to a possible 3rd straight title.
And we were headed to 3 in a row. And I had one of the best statistical years of my career.
And so all he asked for was the one thing every competitor believes he has earned: a fair fight, a chance to compete. The refusal of that single request is the splinter that has festered for 30 years.
And he wouldn't even let me compete for a job. And I said, well, this is crazy.
His belief in himself never wavered, not for a second, and he made that belief plain in the most direct language a competitor can use.
I know I can play, I know I'm better than he is, and I said, just let me compete.
The same raw conviction poured out years later in another setting. The underdog's defiant refusal to simply step aside and accept a back seat in his own kingdom.
When I said, I'm better than he is, and I don't want to be behind him. I shouldn't be behind him.
But the answer was no, and once it was no, the proud man would not bend. Sitting on the bench, he decided, was not how this story was going to end.
So I said, well, I'm not going to sit here on the bench. That's not how I pictured finishing my career.
He requested a trade rather than accept a backup role, and on April 20, 1993, the franchise he had carried to glory shipped him off to the Kansas City Chiefs, and the part that still haunts him is not even the leaving, it is the way it was done. In the ESPN profile, he keeps circling back to the same unanswered questions, asking why he wasn't allowed to compete for the job, why he wasn't even allowed inside the facility during his rehab, demanding to know what he could possibly have done to deserve it. He rehabbed in isolation, and the bitterness of it never fully drained away. The relationship with the man who replaced him, Steve Young, has remained awkward to this day, captured forever in Montana's blunt description of how he viewed their so-called partnership.
My job was to make sure that Steve stayed right where he was, behind me.
That single ugly exit poisoned the well of everything that came next, because when football finally ended for good in 1995, the transition out was its own kind of freefall. Montana described the void with an honesty that cuts deep, the void that swallows so many athletes whole.
I played football since I was 8. So basically 30 plus years.
30 years of identity, of purpose, of being the most important man on every field he ever stood on, and then in an instant, nothing.
And then all of a sudden, cold turkey, you can't play anymore.
He tried the obvious path first, broadcasting. He lasted only a single season, famously calling his wife from his seat at halftime of Super Bowl XXX to tell her he quit, that he couldn't do it. The reason ran deeper than nerves. He simply could not stomach the cruelty of the job, the demand that he sit in a box and pass judgment on players whose situations he could not possibly know from up there.
I just didn't like making those kind of judgments on players.
What truly turned his stomach was the format itself, the manufactured certainty, the demand that an analyst sound sure of himself whether or not he was actually right.
When I was there, they just wanted you to be definitive, argumentative.
It violated something in him, this expectation that he performed false conviction for the cameras, and so he walked away from that too.
And they didn't care whether you were right or wrong. And I didn't feel very good about that.
Underneath all of it ran a darkness that his wife Jennifer has described with unsparing love. She has called him complex, a man with black moods and a moody, everybody out to get him kind of personality, rooted in a lifelong sense of being the underdog who has to prove everyone wrong. For 15 years after retirement, by her account, he genuinely fought to find his value outside the game. And this was a man who had already weathered a great deal in his personal life before the fame even fully arrived. His first 2 marriages in the 1970s and early 1980s, both ended in divorce. The first one explained by Montana with the simple, sad admission, "We were too young," before he finally found lasting partnership with Jennifer. And yet this is where the story, against all odds, refuses to end in darkness. Because Joe Montana did something that so many broken legends could not do. He found his way home. The clearest snapshot of what actually matters to him came during one of the California wildfires that threatened to burn his wine country estate to the ground. The family had already evacuated when a friend in law enforcement called and told him to come back immediately if he wanted to save anything at all. Joe and Jennifer raced back into the house with only minutes to spare. A house whose home gym was filled floor to ceiling with every piece of football memorabilia he owned. The Super Bowl artifacts, the jerseys, the trophies, an entire museum of the greatest career in quarterback history. And in those frantic final minutes, what did the man grab? Not a single piece of the football memorabilia. He and Jennifer grabbed family photographs and big stacks of the kids' artwork from over the years. The monuments to Joe Cool could burn. The crayon drawings could not. That single choice tells you everything about how he survived the slow erasure that his daughter calls heartbreak. He stopped trying to be the monument and started being the grandfather. He found a genuine second career in venture capital, co-founding Liquid 2 Ventures, where an early bet of $100,000 on a company called GitLab eventually returned an estimated $42 million, a single investment win larger than his entire NFL salary, helping build a fortune of around $150 million that dwarfed what the game ever paid him. He poured his competitive fire into the work, and the firm grew to hundreds of portfolio companies and dozens of unicorns, with sons working alongside him. He cooks Italian meals. He travels. He has, by Jennifer's own account, become happier as a grandfather and an investor than he ever was at the white-hot center of the culture. So is the tragedy of Joe Montana truly beyond heartbreaking? In one sense, undeniably yes. Here is a body sentenced to a life at half speed, riddled with arthritis and replacement joints. A man who can no longer run across his own lawn. Here is a legend forced out of the city he loved before he was ready, carrying a 30-year grudge that may never heal. Here is the undisputed greatest of his era, mistaken for a tennis player by kids who think he is Hannah Montana's dad, watching the world hand his crown to someone else while he murmurs, "I wish," and lets the thought fade. But here too is a man who, when the fire came for everything he had ever achieved, ran past the trophies to save the drawings his children made. The heartbreak is real, the fading is real, the pain that wakes him in the night is real, and yet the final complicated truth of Joe Montana is that he found the one thing the spotlight could never give him, and the cooling of his fame could never take away. He learned the hard way what was actually priceless. And in the end, perhaps that is not a tragedy at all. Perhaps that is the only victory that was ever going to last. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed watching this video, click on one of the boxes playing on your screen to watch more similar content.